Following more breaking news today, just in the last hour, North Korea facing tough new sanctions designed to send a message to the brutal regime about its nuclear program and the recent ballistic missile tests. Just a short time ago, the UN Security Council unanimously approved the new sanctions banning key North Korean exports and putting significant limits on foreign investment in North Korea. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, spoke out today in full support of these new sanctions. I want to bring in senior United Nations correspondent Richard Roth now. And Richard, you were there for the vote. What makes these new sanctions different than some of the other measures designed to punish North Korea for its nuclear weapons program that we've seen implemented in the past?
Well, I guess one could say it perhaps is the deepest cut into North Korea's export economy, where it gets badly needed hard currency for fuel for its missile and nuclear test industry. Nikki Haley, the U.S. ambassador, calls this the most stringent set of sanctions on any country in a generation. We have heard tough talk from recent different administrations that the North Korean sanctions imposed by a Security Council meeting are the toughest ever, but nothing seems to deter Pyongyang and its interest in getting missiles that threaten now the east coast of the United States. Nikki Haley and others pleased that the vote was unanimous, but she says there's more to do.
That's right.
The North Korean threat has not left us. It is rapidly growing more dangerous. We've seen 2 ICBMs fired in just the last month. Further action is required. The United States is taking and will continue to take prudent defensive measures to protect ourselves and our allies. Our annual joint military exercises, for instance, are transparent and defense-oriented. They have been carried out regularly and openly for nearly 40 years.
It was just a week ago Ambassador Haley declined to have an emergency Security Council meeting after the latest ICBM launch, saying there's no use for just words. She seems pleased that the Council could unite behind more sanctions. China and Russia are glad that they could all agree. However, China and Russia had pointed words in opposition to the deployment of that THAAD anti-offensive missile weapon system deployed in South Korea with the United States backing and support. So the divisions still remain here. Anna.
A united front on the sanctions, but not on everything. Richard Roth, thank you. 1 hour from now, by the way, I will speak live with Nikki Haley, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, about the growing threat from North Korea and this administration's response. What if these sanctions she voted on don't work? We'll talk to her about what's next. That's next hour live here in the CNN newsroom. Meanwhile,
this is CNN Breaking News.
Breaking news, North Korea is now facing tough new sanctions in response to its 2 recent ballistic missile tests. And just a short time ago, the UN Security Council unanimously approved fresh sanctions, banning $1 billion worth of North Korean exports, including seafood, coal, and iron. Also new sanctions imposing strong limits on foreign investment in North Korea. Moments before today's crucial vote, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, spoke out, saying the new sanctions will hit hard and make a strong point to North Korea that all this nuclear irresponsibility has to stop. And Ambassador Haley is joining us now. Ambassador, thanks for your time this afternoon. You called this the single largest economic sanctions package leveled against North Korea. Do you expect a different result from these sanctions?
Well, thank you very much for having me. First of all, it's a new day at the UN. This was a day of action. This was a day where we stopped all the talk. And this is the day where we said to North Korea they have to stop their irresponsible actions. And I think that what you saw today was a unanimous vote that said we're going to make sure that the North Korea understands what we're talking about. This resolution is the strongest resolution with sanction measures that we've seen in a generation. It will go after a third of North Korea's hard currency. It bans coal, it bans iron, it bans additional laborers that they can send overseas. It has quite huge implications to North Korea. We hope they take notice, and we'll see what happens.
But again, the question was, do you expect a different result from North Korea? Because we know time and again, sanctions have been imposed, sanctions have been increased, and yet North Korea's program continues to progress.
Well, I think what everybody needs to understand is the revenue that goes into North Korea doesn't go in to feed its people who are starving.
Right.
Instead, what it's doing is it's going to fund the reckless nuclear program. So if we reduce the hard currency, we're reducing the funding that allows them to do that. Secondly, we hope that they take note. We hope that they realize this was the international community speaking in one voice, saying that this activity has to stop. They now have a decision to make. This was a gut punch to North Korea today. They can either now take heed and say, okay, let's stop, let's start being responsible and let's see another avenue, or they can continue what they're doing and the international community will continue to respond.
We brought our viewers your comments before the UN Council live here on CNN, and you said further action is required even beyond these sanctions. What does that further action look like?
Well, implementation of the sanctions. You know, we can go and say we're going to put sanctions forward, but the implementation needs to come not just from members of the Security Council, but from all member states. And we need to send that message. And so the first part is passage. The second part is implementation. So we need to go ahead and make sure that we do this. It will cut into a third of their economy, and I think that they'll have to respond accordingly.
Is preemptive military action on the table right now?
That is all up to North Korea. At this point, they really have some serious decisions to make. What I will tell you from the United States perspective is we're prepared to do whatever it takes to defend ourselves and to defend our allies. And the ball is in North Korea's court. They now have to decide where they want to go from here. We hope that they will go the route of peace and security. We hope that they will go the route of focusing on human rights and feeding their people. We hope that they'll go the route of stopping modern slavery that they do in terms of sending laborers overseas and then taking the money from that situation. But again, all of this now is in North Korea's court, and we'll see how they respond.
Well, we've seen how they've responded to the sanctions in the past, and that is with more aggressive action. Kim Jong-un is accused of orchestrating the murder of his own brother. Can sanctions or diplomacy stop him?
Well, you know, I think we did what we could in the UN, and that was basically speak with one voice. He is now on an island. North Korea now has to look at the rest of the world and see that they're all telling them to stop this reckless activity, and they need to respond to that, and they need to respond in a good way. We want to see peace and security on the Korean Peninsula. We want to see responsibility come back in. What we've seen is a reckless dictator who has been paranoid, who's been irresponsible, and who has continued to make his own interests over the interests of his people. And I think that this is now going to see what they're going to do in response. But to have China stand with us, along with Japan and North Korea and the rest of the international community telling North Korea to do this, it's pretty impactful. This was a strong day in the UN. This was a strong day for the United States. It was a strong day for the international community. It was not a good day for North Korea.
We have seen in the last week, in the last couple of weeks, in the last month, different messages coming from the Trump administration about how to handle North Korea, from Rex Tillerson, as Secretary of State, to the CIA Director, Mike Pompeo, talking even about the possibility of regime change. And we heard you last week say no more talk. Why the different messages from this administration?
I don't think you've got different messages from this administration. I think what you heard was we said we're done talking. It's time to act. I think you saw today the United States led the efforts in these negotiations this week and worked with China to see if we could really make an impactful statement to North Korea. Today we acted. It is a new day at the UN where it's not about talk all the time. It is about action. And I think you're going to see us go forward. I think that the administration has said and will continue to say that North Korea has acted recklessly, irresponsibly, and it has to stop. And I think that we have tried to say multiple times that all options are on the table. We continue to give North Korea an out. We continue to give North Korea the ability to stop what they're doing, and now they have to see what they do with that.
Let me ask you briefly, real quick, about the president signing off on these fresh sanctions for Russia. You have said before that everybody knows Russia meddled in our election. Do you think sanctions are enough to stop Russia from meddling in future U.S. elections, including the midterms in just 18 months from now?
I think we'll have to wait and see. You know, we should always be hard on any country that tries to meddle in our elections, whether it's Russia or anyone else. And I think that what you saw is those sanctions were a response to the meddling, and we'll now see how Russia responds with that. I will tell you that we negotiated with Russia this week on this Security Council resolution, and we were able to find common ground in terms of making sure that we had a strong voice for North Korea. We hope that they'll continue to see that it's about strong actions and not about irresponsible ones. And so we hope that their days of meddling in elections are over.
What are the expectations with Rex Tillerson meeting at this Asian Security Summit with Sergei Lavrov?
Well, I think it's a continuation of what Secretary Tillerson has tried to do, which is say, where can we find common ground with Russia? There are a lot of issues that we need to talk about with Russia in terms of counterterrorism, in terms of how we're going to deal with North Korea, in terms of what we're going to do with our crisis in Syria. And so I think that they'll be discussing those and many other things. And so the goal is to see where we can work together. Where we can't work together, we're going to be loud, we're going to be transparent, and we're going to be open with them. But where we can work together, we're going to try and see if we can make some things happen so that we can bring additional peace and security to the world.
Has anybody expressed a problem with Twitter diplomacy?
I'm sorry?
Has anybody expressed a problem with Twitter diplomacy? As we have seen the latest comments regarding Russia from this president saying the relations are at a very low point.
I have not had one country complain to me about the president's tweets. He's going to do it. This is a president who communicates through Twitter as much as he communicates through everything else. The countries pay attention to what he says. Never have they complained, because to them, they know where he stands and what he stands for. And so no complaints from the United Nations or from any of the member states on the president's tweets.
All right, Ambassador Nikki Haley, we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, we'll discuss what we just heard from U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley. Stay with us. We just heard from U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, after the Security Council voted for tough new sanctions against North Korea. And I want to bring in our CNN Global Affairs analyst, Aaron David Miller. He's the VP and a distinguished scholar of the Woodrow Wilson International Center. So you write, Trump and diplomacy, does he have a greater test regarding North Korea, or a greater test than North Korea?
No, I think it's the most complicated foreign policy issue, certainly of this administration, and it's gone live in the sense that sooner or later the North Koreans will perfect their ballistic missile technology, and they're going to figure out a way to solve the problem of reentry, and they already have nukes, and they'll find a way to deliver them. So this is the greatest, presumably existential threat to the United States, and it's literally the problem from hell. And if sanctions alone could do this, I'd join the marching band. I really would. And Nikki Haley delivered a very compelling, tough rap based on a set of sticks. I just don't believe that sanctions have proven with any of these nation states basically to affect and alter regime behavior. It's going to take more than that, and that's why it gets so tricky and so complicated for the administration.
Since you're using the carrot and stick analogy, do you think carrots would work better?
Jim Baker, one of my former bosses, once said, you really shouldn't use, these vegetable metaphors. And I don't like them, even though I use them. Look, the problem for us, I think, is very clear. We can't bomb or preempt because it's simply too risky. And the administration is prepared to negotiate, but prepared to negotiate only a complete rollback and denuclearization of North Korea's weapon system. That's not going to happen. By 2020, the North Koreans are going to have half the nukes that the Brits have right now. So the only way, I think, is to test the proposition, test it, that a discrete back channel between the United States and North Korea could at least determine whether or not there is a way to slow down the program, constrain it, if not freeze it. That's about the best you're going to do, Anna.
President Trump, of course, sold himself as the master negotiator on the campaign trail. He wrote a book on deal making. Do you see a deal maker?
It's interesting. Making real estate deals in New York is complicated. I don't want to take that away from anybody who works in that business. But making deals in the international community where patience is required, where determination and stamina is required, and where knowing the issues are required, is just a far different matter. I'll tell you a short story. In '82, I was an INR analyst at the State Department following Lebanon and the Palestinians. I get a call one morning from the White House, and it's the Vice President, Bush 41, on the phone. And he says, Aaron, I'm sorry to bother you, but I read one of your memos on Lebanon. Do you have a few minutes to talk about it? And I'm thinking to myself, do I have a few minutes to talk to the Vice President? This guy basically knew what he didn't know, and he was in a hurry to find out. That sense of curiosity is critically important for the deal maker. critically important. And frankly, to date, to say the least, we haven't seen that.
Aaron David Miller, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate your expertise in weighing in here.
You're welcome, Anna.